Welcome to the Wade Arnold Podcast. I am Wade Arnold, and I am on a mission to inspire and equip Christian couples to live happy, healthy, and holy marriages. Today, we're going to continue a series of podcasts based on the research that indicates that there are many reasons, but we're going to talk about the top 5 reasons that people are satisfied with and committed to their marriages. We've already talked about perceptions of our partner's commitment and perceptions of our partner's or our spouse's satisfaction. In other words, if we think our spouses are committed and satisfied, then we're more likely to be committed and satisfied. We're going to talk about appreciation. We're going to talk about conflict management. But today we're going to talk about sexual satisfaction. That is one of the top 5 reasons that people are satisfied and committed to their marriages. Now, there's way too much ground to cover on this topic to do justice to it, really. I'm just going to skip across the surface, so to speak. And I will say this, Mom, if you're watching, just be prepared. Buckle up. If you're not my mother, continue watching and enjoy the podcast today. Broadly speaking, there are 4 reasons I believe that people are satisfied or not satisfied with their sex lives. And they are maybe not exactly what you expect, but there are 4. One is physical, another is psychological, the third is social, and the fourth is spiritual. And I'm going to cover each one of these things briefly this afternoon. So first of all, looking at physical reasons that people might not be satisfied with their sex life. And I think here there are 2 categories, really. There's an internal and an external. Internal, by that I mean things like disease. Our bodies aren't functioning well. So, for instance, vascular disease is a major problem for men as they reach midlife and they're not able to maintain or get an erection, and it makes sex very difficult. Or for women, especially after childbirth, there can be pelvic floor dysfunction. And so intercourse may be very painful. And so there's no way to really discount the physical problems that we might encounter that interfere with our sex life. And so a lot of people experience a lot of sexual frustration because of disease, or our bodies just not functioning properly. The second category, the external category, is related more to simply not knowing the biology and knowing what things are and how they function and how they work. So, for instance, there was a recent study that asked people, men and women, to label the genitalia and the different parts of male and female genitalia. And it was embarrassing, or is embarrassing, that people cannot appropriately label the genitalia. Now, I don't think that the physical aspect is maybe the main problem, but if you don't know the different parts of your body or your partner's body, then it's very difficult to engage in a sexual relationship with them. So there's the physical aspect, there's the internal disease part, and then there is simply not knowing the body and how it works. So there's the physical side. Then there is the psychological side. Let's say that we do understand the biology. We do know the body parts and how they function. Then we get into the psychological part. And by that, again, I mean there's probably 2 aspects to that. One is our thoughts, and the other is our emotions. And from my perspective and how human beings work, it's our thoughts that lead to our emotional experience. In other words, it's not what happens to us, it's how we interpret what happens to us that leads to our emotional responses. So, first thing I want to talk about is our thoughts. And we live in a world, especially for folks of a certain age, where maybe sex was not talked about at all. And if you're older, I'm in my mid-50s, younger mid-50s, and if you're older than me, it may be that sex was not talked about at all. It was a taboo subject, and you just didn't know. It was something that you remained silent about, and there wasn't a lot of education about sexual matters. It was something that was just supposed to happen and be natural. And unfortunately, we know now that it simply does not come naturally. You get into my time frame, and in the late 80s and in the 90s, there was the purity movement and True Love Waits and all of that. And that movement, while it was very well intentioned, I think, also probably taught some things that have led to a lot of difficulty for some couples. And one of the difficulties, for instance, is that yes, you're supposed to wait for marriage, but it was interpreted frequently as sex is bad. And when you start to think this way about sex, that doesn't just stop when you get married. The thought process continues. Sex is bad before you get married, but then when you get married, you continue to think sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad. The difficulty is that the idea is that sex is not bad. Sex is not appropriate outside of the context of a loving, lifelong, committed relationship of marriage. So sex is good in its appropriate context. And that was not the message that was preached by and large in the late 80s through the 90s. And that has caused a lot of problems for a lot of young people and now middle-aged people who grew up on that teaching. Purity culture really, again, well-intentioned, but really wasn't exactly an accurate biblical teaching on human sexuality. And so when we have that kind of thought process, it creates a lot of negative emotions around sexuality and sexual expression. And so it's very hard to move from the mindset of sex is good in its appropriate context of marriage. Now I am married, sex is good. Sex was not something that was supposed to be talked about. Good girls don't, and guys had a little bit more permission. Guys were supposed to push. Girls were supposed to say no, 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 no. And this idea of cutting things off when a young female got aroused at all, saying this is not appropriate, that same thought process transfers into marriage, but in marriage it is appropriate. And yet it caused a lot of struggle for a lot of couples that I've talked to. And so that's caused a lot of problems in marriage. So there's the thought processes that lead to negative emotional experiences, and that has caused a lot of trouble within marriages, especially the people that I talk to that are probably in the 40 to 60-year-old range, something like that. So there's physical factors, there's psychological factors, there's also social factors, the third factor. Social factors, really, within the context of marriage, are relationship factors. Let me tell you something about your sex life. And that is, if your relationship is not really good, then it's more than likely that your sexual relationship is not going to be good. Any problems that you have in your relationship are going to show up in the bedroom. And so if you are struggling in your relationship, it's probably true, probably, not 100%, but usually true that you're struggling in the bedroom also. And it's kind of a circular relationship. Sometimes there's relationship problems that show up in the bedroom, and sometimes there's bedroom problems that show up in the relationship. It can go both ways. And the fact is that they're very connected and interconnected. And so if you want to improve your sex life, if you want to improve what goes on in the bedroom, then a good place to start is improving your relationship outside of the bedroom. How are you relating to your spouse? How are you resolving conflict in your relationship in the kitchen or in the living room or in public? And that is going to go a long way to helping you improve your sex life. If you don't feel connected to your spouse outside of the bedroom, or they don't feel connected to you, then that's going to show up in your sexual relationship. So don't be surprised if you are struggling in the bedroom. You can look to something that's going on outside of the bedroom. So there's physical, there's psychological, there's social or relational factors, and then there are spiritual factors as well. So one of the things in my conversations with couples about their sexual relationship when I'm doing coaching or counseling with couples is that they never really have been taught, and so therefore they don't understand the purpose of sex in a marriage. And so the old school teaching was that sex is only for procreation. The only reason that you want to have sex is in order to have children. And I think that that teaching is falling away because there's many ways that God might have designed a sexual relationship. He could have made us like fish, and the female fish lays the eggs and swims off, and the male fish swims along and fertilizes the eggs, but he didn't do that. In fact, in the female anatomy, there is a part of the female anatomy that it has one job, and that is female pleasure. And so what we need to understand is the purpose of sex, God's purpose of sex within a marriage. And you all know a verse like Genesis 2:24 that says that the husband should leave his father and mother and cleave, the leave and cleave idea, to his wife. And we think about that. And the two shall become one flesh. That's the important piece of that verse, right? The two shall become one flesh. We tend to think of that as a purely sexual thing. But becoming one flesh is much more than just a physical union of two people. Becoming one flesh is a spiritual connection. It is a bonding of two families. If you look at the way that word is used in the Old Testament, it doesn't have just to do with sexual relationship. It has to do with the joining of two families. It has to do with becoming one flesh does. It has to do with how we relate to one another, and we develop a shared identity in the world as a couple. So one flesh, yes, there is a sexual component to it, but it's much broader than simply a sexual relationship. It's much more broad than that. Another part of this spiritual component is how mature we are as believers. For instance, if you look at Philippians 2, 3, and 4, Paul tells us, the Philippians and us, to do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit. But the truth is that when I talk with couples and when I'm working with couples, if a person is selfish outside of the bedroom, that selfishness tends to show up inside the bedroom. We tend to make sex about us and not about our partners if we do that outside of the bedroom. And so that's a lack of spiritual maturity that shows up in our sexual relationship. So what I've done today is just a 50,000 foot overview of the problems that we might encounter in our sexual relationship. There are physical problems that we might encounter, psychological, social, and spiritual issues that might come up. The great news is that each one of these issues can be addressed and resolved in conversation with one another. And it may take a third party, like what I do. When I work with couples as a coach, one of the areas that we work on is the sexual relationship. It's not the first thing that we talk about because there are many other factors that make a marriage great, but the sexual relationship is one of those things. And here's the thing. Christians struggle with their sexual relationship as much, if not more, and the research is kind of interesting on this, is that many Christians struggle with their sexual relationship in marriage more than the non-Christians do. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but mainly because of the Christian teaching and poor teaching that we've done in the church on how to have a great sexual relationship. And I should say lack of teaching too. Where do you find this information? And so my hope, my prayer for you is that you will look at your sexual relationship and how it contributes to your relationship satisfaction and commitment or takes away from. If you and your husband or you and your wife are struggling in the bedroom, this is something that we can talk through. I'd be happy to talk with you about how you can improve your marriage. And one way that you do that is through talking about your sexual relationship. So, I would love to talk with you. If you would like to learn more about how you can work with me as a Christian couples coach, Christian marriage coach, be sure to send me a DM, and I will be glad to share with you how we might work together and what that would look like and what the costs are and how we can begin. So until we meet again, let us all go pursue our happy, healthy, holy marriages. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you again.